You know how all of the retailers start putting out Valentine's Day stuff before we've even recovered from the entire month of December, and how they put out Halloween in August? My two guests today encourage us to get back to our roots, no pun intended, and think of our homes evolving with the cycles of the natural world rather than these holidays. When we reflect on the bounty of nature and the insistence on coming back to life over and over again, we'll find we have plenty of inspiration for our homes that has nothing to do with buying, replicas of hearts and pumpkins. Kay Pressney and Becca Cherry have written a lovely book called A Home for All Seasons, which is filled with ideas for a different way of refreshing our homes. And in this conversation, we dig up, no pun intended again, several more ideas to get you inspired. Here are Kay and Becca. Kay Prestney and Becca Cherry, welcome to the Slow Style Home podcast. It's wonderful to have you both.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. Thanks for having us. We're excited to be talking to you today.
Great. We're going to talk about this beautiful book, A Home for All Seasons. And I want to start out by mentioning your manifesto in the beginning. You don't really have an introduction. Instead, you have this manifesto, and it's very succinct. And it immediately gives you an idea of what we're going to read about and learn about in this book. You say, we believe in the emotional and physical benefits of living in alignment with the seasons. And then lastly, you say, we value a mindful life, following the rhythms of nature to enhance both your well-being and your home. So we're going to be nature-centered here today. And I want to start off by asking you, was there something in particular for each of you that made you understand the importance of nature, the value of being aware of it, of bringing it into your homes? How did you come to this whole philosophy that you lay out in this manifesto?
I think for me, I grew up with it. So my mum is a passionate gardener, a real lover of nature, and loves to be outdoors and to bring things from the outdoors into home when I was young. So my childhood memories, and I guess what was normal for me growing up, was to go for lots of walks, to forage along the way. We'd come home with pockets of shells or pine cones, and at Christmas we would go out and gather what we call old man's beard, which is a kind of clematis here in the UK, and it dries really beautifully in the winter hedgerows. There's a wreath actually in the Dutch home in our book that I made using it. And then we'd hang Christmas decorations, and we'd kind of tuck ivy and holly and bay and evergreens into like the picture frames and put it along the fireplace. So I think whatever the season, I was always either outside being immersed in the seasons or could see them evolve in my home as well. So within the built environment, but also the great outdoors. It was a real
Right.
part of who I was.
Yeah, so a real blurring of the lines between inside and outside. And Becca, was it the
Absolutely.
same for you?
Yeah, I think so. Perhaps not such my parents, but my grandparents near a forestry at summertime, and it was always raining there, and the houses were very grey. And because my grandpa was really into gardening, you'd like see his house from the distance with like all these brightly coloured fuchsias and busy lizzies and begonias, and it was just like this beacon of a real
Mm.
visceral effect.
Again, in the manifesto, there is a lot of it in there that feels to me like it's sort of a pushback against modern life, modern industrial life, I guess, to be more specific, a life that is a little bit more separated from nature. That so must be something in your lives where you were like, no, 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 this is not how I want to live.
So I've always felt a connection to nature, even when I'm in a city. And I think the decade I lived in London, in the UK, again, I would seek out nature and recognize that I would feel better. So during the week, I worked for a really busy investment bank on a big
Oh,
trading floor where there were very few windows. It was electric lighting. Everybody had about sort of four screens on their desk, and you couldn't really have been further from nature. There was
yeah.
maybe one slightly sad looking houseplant that nobody really looked after, but that was it. But I would go home, and my flat was in like an urban area in East London, but it had a big picture window in the lounge, and I would always have the big window wide open. And it wasn't really greenery, but it was sky, and that was enough.
Yeah.
It was watching the clouds. It was, you can see colors and textures in the city, even if you're not next to a park. And I think when you have children, you're really aware that they spend a lot of time on tech, like we all do
Yeah.
now, and in sort of school environment, there's not always that direct connection to nature. Things are changing a little bit with that. And I think the recognition that biophilic design in educational institutions and health institutions and corporate environments can have a hugely beneficial impact on people's productivity, their mental health, their physical health. So it's really exciting actually to now witness that changing in the UK and across the world, and there being much more awareness around the benefits of connecting to nature wherever you are.
Yes, for sure. And we've talked about biophilia on the show before, but just give us a reminder of what that means.
So I think there's lots of different interpretations of biophilic design. There's sort of the scientific definition, which dates back to the godfather of biophilic design, Stephen Kellett, and his principles of biophilic design. But at its very basic level, it basically involves bringing in the textures, the sights, the sounds, the smells, all the senses of nature into the built environment for the benefit of people and planet. So whether you're imitating the fractal patterns that you find in nature, whether you're putting images of nature in a house that doesn't have views, or perhaps you might be making the most, if you're designing a house from scratch, of your aspects so that you can have a huge picture window on the forest side of a house, for example, or in a city, make the most of a gap between some buildings. It might be that you put a mirror somewhere if you can't move a window. It's just kind of interior design tricks or architectural design principles in order to make sure that you have as much exposure to nature, whether direct or indirect, as possible.
That was probably the best overview of this whole field of study that I've heard. You've made it very accessible and understandable. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Your approach goes beyond decorating. In every chapter, you have a little note about life and lifestyle. And I'd like it if you could give us some experiences, some ideas of what you've had from paying close attention to the natural world, and how has that affected your overall lifestyle?
So every day I walk my dog twice a day, and through the fields or the forests or around the lakes or by the river. And it's always interesting to me to look at the colors, look at the textures, look at the scenery, and to be really inspired by that. So when I come home, whether I come home to work on an interior design project or shoot styling or even workshops or an event, I'm thinking to myself about what I'm seeing around me at that moment. Like looking at the room I'm in now, I've got lots of things that I've picked up and brought back from my daily adventures. I'm like a magpie. I never return empty-handed. There's pebbles and there's pine cones and there's grasses. So I think consistently, I'm really kind of almost hyper aware of what the seasons are doing, and that seeps into my design kind of fairly seamlessly. I think when what you do is such a passion for you, there's not, like, people often talk about their work life and their home life, whereas mine are really intertwined, I think.
And you're saying let's kind of try to bring those two things together, which I realize is hard for people who are working in offices or working outside their homes. And so, but then I think the homes become a bit of a refuge, or a bit of offer some solace away from that more man-made world. And Becca, I specifically wanted to ask you about light, natural light, because I think as a photographer, I know lighting is everything. And presumably, and your photographs are so beautiful, and presumably the natural light is the best light. But are there lessons from that we can take into our homes?
Yeah, absolutely. I live in a really old cottage, so like little windows, and like when it's dark, it's super dark. If you are inside, it's making like the most of it as possible. So we've got one side that overlooks kind of a neighbor, and there could be the kind of, you could think, oh, I'm going to put shutters there so that it's our privacy. But actually, I'm not going to do that because it's going to block the light, and actually it's going to block my view from the nature that's outside as well. And I'm going to worry less about what other people are doing and just focus on my well-being.
Yeah. And I mean, even shears at least would let in the natural light, but still give you a little bit of privacy. I mean, I feel the same way. We don't have any curtains. Well, we have one curtain in one room on the first floor, and that's it. There are none of the other windows are covered because I'm craving that natural light.
I think you can also, if you're worried about privacy, there's lots of sort of tricks you can do. Like you can get now some really nice sort of vinyl for windows that has etching of natural patterns in. So one of the things that we talk about is you might not be able to be directly immediately next to nature. You might not be able to look out and see a woodland. You might live in the middle of a city, but actually now you can buy coverings. So say you lived on a city street in a kind of a ground floor flat, you can buy opaque adhesive panels, and then you can choose your patterns. So they have the cut out wildflowers or wave patterns. So it's this mimicry of the natural world, whether it's textures or patterns or forms or designs. Doesn't have to be the real thing. I mean, ideally it would be, but actually the next best thing, and again it goes back to the biophilic design principles.
And I think that mimicry of nature phrase that you just used is really important to remember. The big emphasis of your book is how do we change with the seasons and use them as a way to encourage us to change up our homes in small or big ways, but I really like the small ways, because I think that it's easier to do. It can be a little bit more of a daily practice, like you were saying, with going on your walks and picking up a branch or a fallen bird's nest or pebbles. Or if you live by the water, pick up shells.
So I think you hit the nail on the head when you said about it being really small, kind of gentle reflections of the season. What we don't want everyone to do is to buy our book in autumn and think, oh my goodness, my home is way too spring, and to ditch everything they've got and go and spend lots of money on, brand new cushions and all the nice ochre mustard patterns that they're hopefully being inspired by. It's much more about a feel of a season and your own physical comfort. So it might be, say, in the autumn, for example, that you bring some sheepskins that perhaps in the summer have been kept in the garden room or shed so that you can sit outside in the evening because it's a bit chilly and it's nice to have something comfortable to sit on. And for a colour perspective, it could just be that you're foraging some grasses from the field, whatever time of year that is, and then naturally that will be a reflection of the season. So much of our busy, hyper-connected lives disconnect us from the seasons. So to slow down and to be aware of the changing colours and the rhythms and the seasons. We can't all be in full spring abundant growth throughout the year. So it's about thinking about when you feel most drawn to a season. And I think what's been quite fascinating in our conversations actually is that one person's spring isn't necessarily the actual physical springtime. For some people, actually, it can be winter when they feel most like a kind of a period of growth because their lives are maybe a bit less busy. There's more time spent indoors, inside. And actually, for some people, sitting on a cold winter's evening on a long night, that's when all their ideas come. Whereas for somebody else, it's sitting outside in the summer, feeling the warmth on their skin. That's when their ideas flow. So it's again about thinking how they impact your personality and your mind and the flow of your creativity as well.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but that is true. Becca, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, it's just there can be such magic in the ritual of putting things away and then getting them back out again at a specific time of year. I know a couple of the homes, they had these beautiful like vintage armoires, which in themselves, like stacked full of stuff, were like a piece of art as they were. But then going into those and getting out these pieces that you only get out in the autumn or you only get out at Christmas, or that comes out again at spring, it makes them magical again because they're not there all the time.
Yes.
And it's building this collection of things like over your lifetime.
Yes, absolutely. And adding to it and keeping an eye out for something that, like for instance, I pick up random vintage serving dishes, either big bowls or platters that have different patterns on them. And you think about the larger food gatherings you might have in the wintertime, then it's a fun thing to be on the lookout for and add to that collection. So every once in a while, there's something new. I want to talk more about this idea, the difference between celebrating holidays versus seasons. And I don't know about in the UK, but in America, the holidays are completely controlled at this point by the retailers.
Yeah, it's not about that. And I think traditionally, like if you look at the pagan rituals, it was the seasons and following the light as it went through the year and the return of the light at the beginning of February when spring was starting to arrive, like midsummer that's on us now, and then going to fall and the lights going, and just I think looking for meaning in life and recognizing if you're having a hard time now that the light will return and things will get better.
I love that.
And the
Yes.
seasons being that ritual.
Mm. And I think too that it gives you a little bit more freedom in what you surround yourself with in your home. It doesn't have to be quite so prescribed that, oh, this is when the Santa Claus and the Nutcrackers come out, and this is when the pumpkins come out, and yeah.
When we were doing the book, when we came to the winter section, Christmas was one of the things that came to mind. But first of all, not everybody celebrates Christmas. And it's more really for us now a celebration of winter. Like in the Dutch cabin that we styled for the winter chapters, we made a wreath out of old man's beard, clematis. And that felt really Christmassy, but also it could stay up all winter. And although we do identify the seasons with these, as Becca said, quite now commercialized celebrations and traditions, actually through the book, you can see them being celebrated in a much more natural way and in a way that encourages you again to pause and to slow down. If you're going and collecting your materials and you're mindfully making something, then you're becoming much more aligned to the season, and it then brings you joy decorating your home rather than going to join everybody else in the shops and buying things that you don't need, that are not ethically produced or helping anybody in the making of them.
Right.
So
that end up being thrown away so quickly because they don't last, or they're last year's pumpkin style instead of this year's pumpkin style.
I think being creative when you're physically making something is a really good way of being grounded in the moment and in what's around you in terms of the natural materials that are available to you.
Well, and none of these homes are quote unquote perfect. They all look very lived in, but still so lovingly tended to. I want to talk about materiality a little bit. That was a major thing that I picked up from your book, even though for each chapter you have a spread that talks about the colors of the season, and we will talk about the colors and color palettes because I think people respond so strongly to color. But I think the materials of the season are equally important.
So obviously you've got the sheepskins and the wools that are like autumn, winter. And then I think in spring, summer, you've obviously moving into your cottons and your linens, things that kind of like you've got your sheer linen curtains that kind of float in the breeze when you've got your windows open and add that sense of movement. So things become heavier as you want to be held and comforted. And then in spring, summer, you want to be freer.
Right. Going back to your idea of simple changes, velvet is one of my favorite fabrics in the wintertime. You could tie a velvet ribbon around your curtains and use those as tie backs. Just something really simple like that brings in some of those materials that feel very particular to a season. There's a lot of wicker I noticed in some of these homes that you guys shot.
Yeah, we love wicker as well. Go to a local charity shop or a charity warehouse and have a rummage. And there's usually one trick you can do if you wanted a wicker light, for example, and you find an old broken basket, and then you can just feed a bulb through the top of it, and then it becomes a light. Don't feel like you have to be dictated to by what the shops or the trends are telling you. Just go with really what makes you feel good. And the way that we encourage people to decorate, and this idea of constantly just bringing in things that you find around you or that you make yourself, means that your home is really timeless, because you're not becoming sort of victim almost to trends, because as soon as the next trend comes along, people then feel disenchanted with the things they bought from the last trend. And that's, I think, where we've got into such a pickle, for want of a better word, with our society. And we've had too much easy access to too many new products, and we don't need them anymore.
Right. And I think it's a summer chapter. You talk about making terracotta lampshades for hanging pendants, and it sounds really doable. I mean, it doesn't sound difficult at all. So I won't go into it because people can read it in the book and see for themselves. But and they're adorable. They're really, really darling.
They were actually made by the lovely Veronica, who lives in Sweden, and she was telling us they're just made from air dried clay. So there's not a how-to in the book, but in case anybody's wondering, you basically roll out your air-dried clay and then use your fingers to flute the edges. and then you cut out a circle in the top to allow your bulb fitting to go through it, and then you just leave them to dry, and then you can hanging them at different heights is effective.
Well, let's talk about color now. When we think about the seasons, our mind does often go right to colors. I mean, I don't think a color exists that nature has not created for us already to copy.
I definitely think that people had been influenced by colours within their homes, and there was definitely a lot of green. Like it's the favourite, well, blue is the favourite colour of everyone apparently, but green is so easy to live with, isn't it? It's like the most calming colour to be around.
I love it.
Yeah, me too. Definitely pinks and yellows. I think that they are quite trendy at the moment, but obviously also I think they are really easy colours to live with as well. You think pink especially is such a soothing colour. And I suppose traditionally it's had that like the female connotations with it, but I think that over time, because it's been so popular for such a long time, the kind of millennial pink, I think it has been embraced by men and women, and they've realised that a pink palette can feel really nurturing and like you're really held.
Yes. In our den and the inside of our bookcases is a blush pink in the high gloss, which I was kind of copying from the inside of a seashell. Yeah, so it took away that gendered idea when I went to nature to kind of figure out what the color should be.
No, and I think what's really interesting as well is that we have these very sort of dictated color palettes of each season. We're told that Christmas and winter is red and white, that spring is pale pink and pale blue, and that summer is white and maybe yellow. But actually, we really noticed actually this commonality of colors through the seasons, and it was just the shades and the depths and the texture almost of them that changed. So in our winter mood board, there's quite a lot of pink, which really surprised me, because I didn't think actually that pink was really a color of the winter at all, but that sort of deep blush pink rather than the soft pink of springtime or a really washed out pink of summer, that sort of deep, like Becca said, cosseting pink of winter.
Yeah, I love that idea that no one season owns particular colors. And in one sense, it takes the pressure off when you're decorating seasonally. It just feels like there's less rush to it, I guess.
It gets you off the hamster wheel. I think a lot of people are not even aware of nature at all. They're on the capitalism, consumerism, like work to earn money to buy more stuff, and on and on and on. And if you can stop and be like, appreciate, like, look at the moon, look at the stars, look at these amazing flowers out here. Actually, do I need all this stuff? I mean, it can sound trite, I suppose.
The thread through this entire conversation, I think, has been that when we start talking about nature, we start expanding the conversation into other areas of life, culture, society. I mean, you've brought up economics, you've brought up how things are made, you've brought up mental health.
It's all connected. We're like connected to everything, and like we've forgotten that, I think. But like definitely more and more people are waking up to realize that everything is connected. And maybe you can't influence what's happening the other side of the world, but you can start where you are.
Oh, yeah. Last word to you. Okay.
Well, I think to echo really what Becca just said, as soon as you start noticing and bringing in nature to your home, or spending time out in nature and making the effort to go for a walk, whether you've got a dog or you don't, it's going to make you feel better. And the happier we are, then the kinder we are to other people. And that is the hope for the future, that it's kindness and it's a connection to nature and it's returning to our roots that's going to make the world a better place.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much, not just for this conversation, but for this very beautiful book. It's been a joy to talk to you both.
Thank you so much. We've absolutely loved talking to you too, Sandra. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.